In the heart of the 19th century, the land of the Yoruba was like a living drumbeat, its towns and villages scattered across the green folds of hills, rivers winding like silver snakes, and the red earth carrying stories as old as time. The air was thick with the sound of markets, the clang of blacksmiths, and the chant of priests calling to the gods. Yet beneath this rhythm of life, a shadow of war and ambition stirred, for this was an age when kingdoms rose and fell like the tide. Among the Yoruba stood the Egba people, a people forged by hardship and survival. They were wanderers once, driven from the ruins of Oyo after enemies burned their homes and scattered their clans. Like seeds carried by the wind, they gathered in a new place, a land of rocky hills, caves, and strong rivers. There they built Abeokuta, the city under the rock, where Olumo stood like a giant guardian watching over them. Every stone of its walls carried a vow, never again would they be swept away so easily. Behind those walls lay not just clay houses and farms, but hope, safety, and the determination to remain free. But beyond the forests to the west, another power thundered like a war drum, the kingdom of Dahomey. Rich, disciplined, and fierce, Dahomey was feared across West Africa. Its kings commanded armies that marched in perfect rhythm, their steps shaking the earth. Most striking of all were the Amazons, women trained as warriors from childhood, their strength and courage equal to any man. Their battle cries could chill the heart of even the bravest opponent, and their spears glittered like lightning in the sun. Dahomey's wealth was tied to the trade routes that carried palm oil, slaves, and goods to the coast. To control the land was to control the lifeblood of the kingdom. And so, as the Egba grew stronger behind their walls, and Abeokuta's fame spread across the land, Dahomey's gaze turned eastward. The stage was set, though the actors had not yet clashed. The land was alive, the people were ready, and the storm had only just begun to gather. The seeds of war are often sown not in anger alone, but in desire, the desire for power, for wealth, for dominion over others. So it was between Dahomey and the Egba. For Dahomey, Abeokuta was more than a city under the rock. It was a rising star on the map of trade, a fortress standing between Dahomey and the riches of the hinterland. The lifeblood of Dahomey's strength flowed from trade routes leading to the coast, where European ships anchored, hungry for palm oil and captives. To control Abeokuta was to unlock new roads, new markets, new chains of wealth. And to a kingdom that had long thrived on the business of war and the selling of men and women into bondage, Abeokuta's resistance was like a thorn in the flesh. But the Egba had fled once before from the ruins of Oyo, and they carried the scars of that flight in their hearts. Never again would they bend their backs to serve another master. Abeokuta was their last refuge, carved out of hardship, blessed by the shelter of Olumo Rock, and guarded by walls built with sweat and blood. Each gate was more than wood and iron, it was a promise of freedom, a shield for their children, and a line they would not let any enemy cross. Between these two visions, the hunger of Dahomey for dominance and the resolve of the Egba for survival grew a tension that could not be soothed. Messengers carried words between them, but the words were edged like knives. Traders told of Dahomey's armies drilling, of Egba hunters sharpening their weapons, of whispers in the markets that a storm was coming. In the year 1851, the storm finally broke. King Jizo of Dahomey, proud and unyielding, gathered his armies like clouds before a tempest. From Dahomey, the royal city, they marched thousands of warriors, their bodies painted, their weapons gleaming, their chants rolling like thunder across the land. At their head, the dreaded Amazons, women whose eyes burned with fire, whose spears struck with the speed of lightning. Villages along the path trembled as the dust of their march darkened the sky. Their target was Abeokuta, the city under the rock, the fortress that dared to defy Dahomey's power. But within Abeokuta, the Egba were ready. Hunters left the forests to stand beside farmers. Blacksmiths who hammered iron by day forged weapons by night. Even the prayers of the old and the songs of the children seemed to strengthen the walls. Firearms, traded from Europeans, were polished and prepared, and strategies were whispered in the cool shadows of Olumo Rock. They were outnumbered, but they had unity, and unity was their shield. When Jizo's army reached the city, the earth shook with the clash. The Amazons charged with fearless cries, their blades slicing through the air. The men of Dahomey struck like a flood against the walls, determined to break through. But the Egba answered with musket fire that cracked like thunder, stones hurled from the heights, and traps laid in narrow paths. The rock and walls of Abeokuta became living defenders, standing with their people. The battle raged from dawn until the sun began to fall, and the ground was stained with the blood of both sides. Yet, to the astonishment of the land, it was the Egba who stood victorious. Dahomey's warriors, mighty and feared across West Africa, were forced into retreat. Their bodies lay heavy before Abeokuta's gates, their pride wounded deeper than their flesh. The news spread like wildfire. Dahomey had been stopped. Markets whispered it, towns echoed it, and the myth of Dahomey's invincibility cracked. For the Egba, it was more than a victory, it was proof that courage, unity, and strategy could overcome even the fiercest storm. For Dahomey, it was a scar, one that would not heal quickly, and one that would call them back again in search of revenge. The clash of 1851 left the land hushed, but not at peace. The smoke of battle had lifted, yet the fire of rivalry still burned beneath the soil. For Dahomey, the sting of defeat was a wound too raw to ignore. The kingdom that had once carried fear like a crown now carried shame like a burden. In Dahomey, King Jizo swore that the blood spilled before Abeokuta's walls would one day be avenged. The drums of training beat louder, the Amazons sharpened their spears, and the warriors drilled with renewed fury. Revenge was no longer a choice, it was a vow. In Abeokuta, the victory brought pride, but also caution. The Egba knew Dahomey's shadow still loomed beyond the forests. Their walls were raised higher, their gates fortified, their hunters trained in tighter ranks. Every hill and path leading to the city was studied like a book of war. Alliances were also sought, ties with neighboring Yoruba groups, friendships with distant towns, and most importantly, bonds with the Europeans whose muskets had already proven their worth. The Europeans, too, were watching. Missionaries preached beneath the shade of trees, traders bargained in the markets, and whispers of politics traveled with their caravans. For them, Abeokuta was not only a stronghold of the Egba but also a doorway into the heart of Yorubaland. Each treaty signed, each weapon sold, tightened their grip on the future. Between Dahomey's thirst for revenge and the Egba's determination to endure, the land stood on shifting sands. Every feast, every market day, every festival carried an undertone of waiting. The people of both kingdoms knew the truth. The war was not over, only paused, like a river held back by a dam that would one day burst again. 13 years after the first clash, the drums of war sounded again. King Jizo had gone to the grave, but his vow of vengeance did not die with him. His son, King Gliel, took the throne of Dahomey, and with it, the burden of restoring his father's honor. To Gliel, Abeokuta was more than a city, it was the scar upon Dahomey's pride, the rock that mocked their strength. And so, in 1864, he gathered a new storm. Once more, the armies of Dahomey marched east, their columns stretching like a river of steel and fire. The Amazons, fierce as ever, led the charge, their chants piercing the morning air, their blades flashing in the sun. Men followed in countless ranks, their banners snapping in the wind, their resolve hardened by years of preparation. Villages along their path fell silent, knowing the flood was moving toward Abeokuta. But inside the city under the rock, the Egba had not been idle. The memory of 1851 had taught them vigilance. The walls stood stronger, the gates firmer, the muskets sharper. Farmers left their fields, hunters their forests, women and men alike prepared in spirit for what was to come. Abeokuta's heart beat as one, every soul tied to the fate of their fortress. The clash was thunderous. The Amazons stormed the gates with cries that split the sky, their courage ablaze that would not dim. Yet the Egba answered with musket fire rolling like a drumbeat, with traps laid in the narrow paths, with a defense that turned every stone and hill into a weapon. The battle raged for hours, then days, the ground soaked in sacrifice, the air heavy with the cries of the wounded. But again, the city stood unbroken. The armies of Dahomey, mighty and relentless, were forced back, their dead lying thick before the walls. The defeat was not just a loss of men, but a blow to the very spirit of Dahomey. The cost was heavy, thousands cut down, the Amazons falling in numbers that shook their legend, and the pride of Dahomey further dimmed. For the Egba, it was another triumph of unity, of sacrifice, of a people bound together by the will to remain free. For Dahomey, it was a bitter truth that even the fiercest storm can break against the rock of determination. The clash of 1864 echoed far beyond the battlefield, carving into history the tale of a city that twice defied an empire. When the dust of 1864 finally settled, the echoes of battle lingered far beyond the walls of Abeokuta. For the Egba, victory was not just survival, it was transformation. Twice they had stood against the fiercest kingdom in the region, twice they had repelled its storm. Their walls became more than stone, they became a symbol of identity. Children grew up hearing that Abeokuta was unconquerable, that Olumo Rock itself had shielded them. Pride spread through the people, and with it a deeper sense of unity. To be Egba was now to be part of a story written in courage and resilience. But in Dahomey, the defeat cut like a blade. The armies that once made neighbors tremble were now remembered for their failure at Abeokuta's gates. The Amazons, once spoken of as invincible, had fallen in great numbers. The kingdom's prestige dimmed, its aura of fear cracked. Though Dahomey would continue to fight wars and seek power, the defeats at Abeokuta marked the beginning of a slow decline, weakening it just as foreign powers were tightening their grip on Africa. Into this shifting balance stepped the missionaries and Europeans. They had cheered Abeokuta's victories, for each Egba success weakened the slave trade and opened new roads for commerce in palm oil and other goods. Their presence grew stronger, their schools and churches multiplying, their influence reaching deeper into the heart of the people. Firearms, treaties, and prayers all carried their mark. The wars had proven that the Egba could not be crushed by Dahomey, but in doing so, they had also thrown open the door to a different kind of power, one that came not with spears and Amazons, but with pens, crosses, and contracts. Thus, the echoes of victory and defeat shaped more than two kingdoms. They reshaped the land itself, preparing it for the great tide of colonialism that was soon to wash over West Africa. Today, the story of the Egba-Dahomey Wars still beats like a drum in memory, echoing across two lands that once stood face to face in fire and blood. In Abeokuta, the victories are remembered with pride. The walls of the old city, though weathered by time, still whisper of muskets fired from their heights, of hunters and farmers who stood shoulder to shoulder, of Olumo Rock watching like a guardian spirit. To the Egba, it is more than history, it is proof that unity can turn a small refuge into a fortress that outlasts empires. In Benin Republic, where Dahomey's heart still lies, the tale carries a different tone. The bravery of the Amazons and the warriors of King Jizo and King Gliel is remembered as a testament of courage, even in defeat. Their march to Abeokuta, their fearlessness before the city walls, remains part of the proud heritage of Dahomey's military tradition. For though they did not claim victory, they left behind a legend of valor that still inspires. Together, the wars offer lessons that stretch beyond borders. They remind us that unity is strength, that when a people hold fast to one another, even the fiercest storm can break upon them. They remind us of courage, both in the defenders who guarded their homes and in the attackers who marched with unwavering resolve. And they remind us of the cost of ambition without balance, the heavy price that wars demand from victors and vanquished alike. As part of the larger fabric of Yoruba and West African history, the Egba-Dahomey Wars stand not only as tales of conquest and defense, but as mirrors of a time when kingdoms defined their destiny through war, just before the tide of colonialism swept in to redraw their fates. They are remembered not with hate, but with respect for the resilience, the bravery, and the human spirit that shone on both sides. And so the story endures, etched into memory, carried in song, and spoken in history books, reminding generations that the past is not dead earth, but living soil from which the future still grows.